Good evening. Welcome to the show. I'm having a problem right off the bat. There's no way that I can possibly get everything in that I want to talk to Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn, the people's doctor, about in this half hour. We've got too much to share with you, and it's very frustrating. Let's just begin. You write the column for the Tucson Citizen.
Yes, the Tucson Citizen has been very kind to me, and I'm very grateful to all my loyal readers in this area because they write me very interesting letters. And as a matter of fact, I have a lot of regard for the Citizen because some years ago they decided to replace me with another doctor column, and some people objected. So the Citizen ran a ballot in the newspapers, and they had a vote on who should be their medical columnist. And there hasn't been another newspaper in the country that's ever used that kind of democratic style. I think that even though it was Pulitzer who founded the Arizona Citizen, I think that newspaper deserves a Pulitzer Prize anyway.
And what was the vote? How did it turn out?
Oh, the vote was, it was about 1,057 for me and about 53 for the other guy. And somebody said to me, how come the other guy got 53 votes? And I said, well, he probably has a lot of relatives in Tucson.
In Tucson. This is a difficult show for me to do because I'm supposed to sit here and be impartial, interviewing someone. And when I have someone on that I admire, and I read your column, and it's difficult to do because I'm supposed to be objective. But I find
objective?
Yes.
Well, let me take off on that word. Because you see, when people write me a letter and they ask me a question, I always select the data on all sides of the question. Because if you go into the medical literature, you can prove any side of any question. But what I do is I select objectively that data which appeals to me. And the other side selects objectively that data which appeals to them. Because you see, objectivity in science turns out to be mostly a myth. And if anybody takes a look at the original research of people like Galileo or Newton, and even today, Margaret Mead, you find out that all of them have fudged on their data. And this has been brought home in a wonderful new book by William Broad and Nicholas Wade, the writers for the AAAS publication Science. The book is called Betrayers of the Trust. And they trace the fraud and deceit in science beginning from its earliest days and right up to today. They show the fraud and deceit in medicine existing at places like Harvard and Yale, and in my city of Chicago, biotest laboratories that invented data that was supposed to show that the antihypertensive drugs were safe. And now we know how much fraud there is. So I don't think that you have to apologize for being subjective.
All right. On that basis, we'll just go right through and do this half hour. One of the things that bothers me on this same subject you were talking about is if you discuss acupuncture with a quote-unquote modern doctor, and they will head right for the statistics, and I agree with you totally. Having had lots of debate, you can do anything you want with statistics. When people come at me with statistical arguments, I completely eliminate them because I feel they don't have any logic or reasoning. They're just quoting statistics. If I had the time, I could find the statistics on the other side that would match. But
well,
the doctors...
it's the secret language of the doctor. I have all my medical students read a book called How to Lie with Statistics by Darrell Huff. And I would recommend it to anybody in your viewing audience. It's about 75 pages long, and it starts out with the story of a butcher who sells brains. And he sells pediatricians' brains for $1 a pound. And he sells psychiatrists' brains for $5 a pound. And somebody says to him, why are psychiatrists' brains so expensive? And he says, you know how many psychiatrists you have to kill to get a pound of brains? Of course, I shouldn't tell stories like that because I learned in medical school that you should never argue with a psychiatrist because you can't win even when you make an appointment. Because if you come late, he calls you hostile. And if you come early, he calls you anxious. And if you come on time, he calls you compulsive.
Compulsive. With that, we'll be right back. My guest is Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn, and he's the people's doctor. He's the doctor that says there's an awful lot wrong with modern medicine, and I'll tell you about it. And I bet that gets you into one heck of a... Not too many doctors speak to you, I bet.
Well, not only do they speak to me, but I speak to them. Do you know that last week I was the keynote speaker at the National Convention of the American Medical Students Association? And I had an opportunity to share with those 1,000 students from all parts of the country my idea of what a good doctor should be like. I told the students that if they're looking for a good role model to serve as their teacher, they should first of all choose a doctor who knows how to deliver babies at home. Because hospital births today have become so dangerous that the home is the only place where a mother can safely deliver a healthy baby. I told the medical students that, secondly, they should look for a doctor who will tell people the truth about the dangers of the infant vaccines, the dangers of the daycare centers, which were so well illustrated in in Phoenix, in Maricopa County, and the dangers of infant formula. I told the medical students that they should look for a doctor who will give patients the prescribing information on the dangerous drugs, on the antihypertensives, on Inderol and aldactazide.
But wait a minute, if doctors do that, that means that it takes at least an extra 4 minutes.
Oh,
and they all are clocked that.
Wait a minute. Let me argue with you on that, because that's what the doctors say. They say, we don't have time to talk to the patients about side effects. My answer is, cut your time down and just hand them the printed information that comes with the drug. And then a doctor wouldn't have to take any time at all. Because you see, doctors don't want to give patients that information. A doctor is trained to hide information from the patients. He is trained in the ethic of dishonesty. From the first time when, as a medical student, he enters the operating room and he sees a sponge come out of the belly from a previous operation, he learns that you don't exactly rush out and share that information with the family waiting outside. That's when, right in the operating room, a strategy meeting is held. And that's when the fledgling doctor learns the fine art of deception and corruption and deceit and evasion and shuffling, and he carries that lesson with him the rest of his life. So you can always expect your doctor not to tell you the truth. I tell people to carry out what I call the Mendelsohn honesty test. The next time you go to your doctor and he hands you a prescription for a powerful drug, ask him what the side effects are. And when he tells you what he wants you to know, then instead of marching off to the drugstore, you take a detour and you stop at the public library and you spend 15 or 20 minutes and you read up on what the real side effects are. And then you can decide whether you're going to go back to your doctor, preferably with a whole bunch of tough-looking relatives, and ask him some real questions. The other part of my prescription for those medical students, if you're looking for a good doctor, is find somebody who will go to bat for his patients, even if it means testifying against another doctor.
Oh, that's a toughie.
Well, they're all toughies, because you see, the way doctors are trained today in medical school, their education is the poorest of any professional education in the whole country. They go a long time. Now, they call it higher education. I call it longer education. And everybody in medical education knows that the half-life of a medical fact is 4 years, which means that half of everything you have learned in medical school is either outdated or wrong at the end of 4 years. And the only problem is we don't know which half. and you see, doctors learn so little. They don't learn about nutrition. Because doctors believe in better living through chemistry. And if you ask a doctor, what should I eat? His answer is, just eat a well-balanced diet, because that's part of the catechism of the religion of modern medicine. He learns those catchphrases. And if you ask a doctor what he thinks a well-balanced diet is, he doesn't know what to say. But if you want to find out what he thinks a well-balanced diet is, all you got to do is look at hospital food, particularly the romance of the pediatricians with Jell-O, which I can never figure out why they give that junk food to these little babies. I tell people that if you have to go into the hospital, for God's sakes, don't eat the hospital food. Have somebody bring food from home. And not only do doctors not learn about nutrition, they learn precious little about drugs. The average medical school spends 40 hours, sometimes 60 hours, of formal pharmacology trying to teach it to their students, which means that the detail man from the drug company knows more than the doctor, and he's the one who educates the doctor for the rest of his life.
And what makes you mad is you're sitting in the doctor's office, the doctor's already 45 minutes late, and who gets in first? The detail man. You see it with the briefcase and the samples sticking out. You know what's going on.
Oh, yes. And then the detail man is the one who influences the prescribing patterns. So you can always tell when a detail man has been through a town. You can see that he leaves behind him a trail of prescriptions for drugs with wonderful sounding names like Procardia, for the heart, Corguard, the guard for the heart, Bendectin, sounds like a benediction, Valium, doesn't it sound like it makes you valiant? Librium, liberates you. Sinequan, that without which you cannot do. I love the way the names of drugs are invented by the drug companies, and then the doctors fall for this.
We'll be right back. Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn is my guest, and we're having a heck of a time discussing modern medicine.
I think we're having a great time.
Yeah, I don't know if they're having such a good time as we are.
Well, you know, you can really have a good time if you don't take doctors too seriously. Because when you learn when you look at what doctors learn, it's obvious that all they learn is this catechism that I refer to. They learn that if a patient asks them a question, the proper answer is just trust me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Trust me. You picked me. I'm your doctor. Trust
yes,
me.
Unless it's a woman, then it's just trust me, dear.
Yes, dear.
If you ask,
or you know it's your time of month, so you're not functioning too well, so we'll ignore the question.
Or what do you need your uterus for? It's just a sac for cancer. Or if they want to do a hysterectomy, I'm taking out the baby carriage, but I'm leaving in the playpen.
Yes.
If they want to take off a breast, your husband loves you for yourself, not for your breasts.
Yeah. I think the telling argument with that is that mostly it's male doctors, and if you ever said to them, well, we're just going to remove the scrotum, and you know you really don't need it.
Well, that's true, but let me just say, Ellen, that as much as doctors discriminate against women, they don't let men off the hook either. 97% of all American newborn males are circumcised, in contrast to 1.5% in England. And we know that circumcision has no medical benefits, and it has plenty of risks. And the
now, wait a minute. Now, wait. I have to ask you this. I know from reading your column that you are of the Orthodox Jewish persuasion.
Right. And
I've heard this argument before against circumcision. And how can you go along with that? Because Orthodox Judaism and the Muslim faith calls for circumcision.
Oh, absolutely. But you see, I tell every Jewish parent that when they have their child circumcised, they should know that that is not for any medical benefit, that they are having them circumcised for purely religious reasons. In other words, they have to make a leap of faith. Now,
but what about the argument that the foreskin, if allowed to remain, collects
smegma,
yes.
Particles.
Right,
well,
and that in later life that can give cancer to the partner.
Well, let me tell you, all the arguments about cancer of the cervix and cancer of the penis and cleanliness have all been answered in the medical literature. Now, I'll tell you what the U.S. Army says, because the U.S. Army tries to circumcise every recruit who comes in. And if you take a look at the Armed Forces Medical Journal article, they recommend circumcision for about 6 reasons. Number one, they have a surplus number of doctors. Number two, they have a surplus number of beds. Number three, it is a hygienic measure of cleanliness. Now that isn't true, because if somebody takes a bath once a week, they're going to be just as clean if they're circumcised or not circumcised. Number four, it prevents venereal disease, which of course it does not. And number five, it promotes discipline. And that's what I find most interesting.
It promotes discipline?
Sure, because the Army feels that if the recruit finds out right at the beginning what can be done to him, he might behave himself for a couple of weeks. And you see, when you take a look at the complications of circumcision, particularly on the first day of life, which is how it's done in modern medicine, in the dirty hospital where you can pick up germs you can't get anywhere else in town, on the first day of life when the child cannot control his temperature regulating mechanisms, often done by a doctor, but very frequently by the medical student, who just hopes that the guy won't catch up with him 20 years later. As far as I'm concerned, I recommend to every parent that if you take a look at the medical literature, and if anybody can't find the literature, I will be happy to send them a copy of my newsletter on circumcision, they will discover for themselves that there are no medical benefits, and the only reason
What
for
about
doing
not giving cancer to your partner many years later? Female cancer.
I have to tell you that there is no evidence for that. There's a reason why Jewish women have such a low incidence of cancer of the cervix. Because you see, if you take a look at the risk factors for cancer of the cervix, there are 3 of them: the pill, the IUD, and multiple sexual partners. So if women have not been exposed by their doctor to the pill or the IUD, and if they've been married to the same husband for their entire lives and have been faithful, then the risk of an error on the pap smear is greater than the risk of their getting cancer of the cervix. And those women should probably never have a pap smear. You see, the pap smear, which now you know the American Cancer Society has given up as a routine annual exam.
I noticed
even there, and it's as if they have been reading my book, because I recommended against the routine pap smear in 1979 because of its high error rate. And now the ACS has given it up, and I'm advising everybody to decide what category you're in. Are you in the category that needs a pap smear very frequently, or are you in the category who should never have a pap smear?
And the category that needs it would be a history of female cancer in your family?
No, the category that needs it are the ones who've been exposed to the pill, the IUD, or who've had multiple sexual partners. The highest incidence of cancer of the cervix in our country occurs in prostitutes. The lowest incidence occurs in nuns. Now, the other interesting epidemiologic study is that the highest incidence of breast cancer occurs in nuns, and the lowest incidence of breast cancer occurs in women who have nursed for 30 months or more.
Count me in.
Great. Congratulations. You serve as a good role model for the rest of the country as far as I'm concerned.
We'll come back and we'll talk about some of the wonders of breastfeeding. I couldn't let you go away without doing a whole segment on that. We'll be right back. Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn is my guest. He's the author of these 2 books, Confessions of a Medical Heretic, and the new book, Male Malpractice. We've been chatting about what's wrong with medical science today, and according to Dr. Mendelsohn, plenty. Talking about breastfeeding, I have to share an experience with you, and as I said to you during the commercial, you're going to love my experience.
I'm looking forward.
But of course, I loved the experience too. I had a child. I had 2 children earlier and then 1 10 years later, and she was born 6 weeks premature. Now, as you know, it's one thing to nurse a child, and it's another to nurse a premature infant, excuse me, who doesn't even have the energy to suck,
Right.
and is being fed by tubes.
Right.
So it took a great deal of effort on my part to bring my milk supply in, while the baby was didn't have enough energy to help me bring the supply in.
And devotion as well.
Yes, and at that time you had to be at the hospital they wouldn't let you bring milk in. It took a great deal of time and effort. One of my pediatricians encouraged it. Of course, I'd made up my mind anyway. The other one came in and he said, well, you can or cannot as you choose. He said there are no real benefits, so it's up to you. Now, of course, I chose to ignore his advice, and through a great deal of effort, I did nurse this one. And in my opinion, what would have happened is that she would have died had I not nursed her, because it turns out she was an extremely allergic child who had colic for 6 months, and through experimentation we found out she was allergic to the milk that I was drinking. And not only that, when we put her on a supplement 1 a day, soy product, that did no good either. We turned out later on she was allergic to peas. When we started foods a year later, peas are the same family as soy. She was allergic to that family. And anytime she was on a supplement like soy, she had severe diarrhea. And I think you mentioned in your column how some of the babies perish from that they can't control the diarrhea.
Right.
So I am here to say that no matter what it takes, it's worth it. And I'll turn it over to you.
Well, that's a great lesson for everybody listening to this program, because pediatricians in general believe that God made a mistake when he didn't put Similac into women's breasts. And as far as I'm concerned, I listen to the way the pediatricians talk to mothers. If a mother says to a pediatrician, should I breastfeed or bottle feed, the pediatrician doesn't tell the mother that infant formula is deficient in the very enzyme, taurine, which is necessary for the optimum development of the human brain. Instead, he says, breastfeeding is best, but bottle feeding is just as good, which of course is at odds with all kinds of logic. Pediatricians don't tell mothers or fathers that the incidence of sudden infant death is 20 times as high in formula-fed babies as it is in breastfed babies. I have developed such an aversion to infant formula that when I see a baby being formula-fed, I feel that that activity should not be carried out in public. If a mother wants to formula-feed her baby, she should go into the toilet to do that.
And hide.
That's
Close
right.
the door.
That's right.
The other thing that I must add is that I had my 2 older children were sick throughout their childhood until they reached about 6 or 7, and a couple of them were in the hospital with pneumonia and so on and so forth. This child has been the healthiest by far.
Sure. Got a good start.
By far.
Got a good start.
And I always say that God did not give women breasts for the pleasure of men, that breasts are on a woman for a purpose, and that's to feed babies.
Well, you know, the religious ideas of doctors in their particular religion are so strange. Look at the way obstetricians feel that God made a mistake when he didn't put a zipper into women's bellies, because the cesarean section rate has now reached epidemic levels of 28% across the country. And look at the way they are forcing every woman who's had a section to have a second one. 97% of all women who've had a primary section are forced to be resectioned because of the old doctor's tale, once a section, always a section, which is at odds with everything in the medical literature.
We've only got 1 minute, and I have to ask you, is there a good medical school today that is turning out good doctors?
Well, let's take the #1 medical school in the country, Harvard Medical School. This year announced that their curriculum over the last 200 years has not produced warm, compassionate doctors, and they are changing their curriculum. So if that's what Harvard is doing, what can you say about the other schools?
So as of this moment, there's no place to recommend someone to go to turn out a warm, compassionate human doctor.
The best thing medical students can do right now is to stay close to their own families, close to their own culture, close to their own background, and stay as far away as they can from their professors, because the professors are the ones who are giving them that disastrously poor education.
Have any of you who have spoken out against the current medical practice been kicked out of hospitals and staffs?
Oh, some of the most famous doctors have. It hasn't happened to me yet, but Dr. George Kreil, head of the Cleveland Clinic, got kicked out of the Cleveland Academy of Medicine because he spoke out against radical mastectomy. Dr. Harold Manor got kicked out of Loyola. Right, got kicked out of Loyola University. The chief complaint that doctors have against me goes something like this. They say, Bob, we know that everything you say in your books is true, but why did you spread it before the public instead of keeping it inside medical journals? And I tell them it's because nobody reads medical journals, not even the doctors.
My guest has been Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn.
Thank you.